Okay, let's get started. Badram Karanebihi Shunyama Devaha Badram Pashyema Akshabihi Rejatraha Stirairangayir Tushtuam Sastanubihi Veshema Devahitan Yadayuhu Swastinah Indro Vridrashravaha Swastinah Pusha Vishwavedaha Swastinah Tarksho Arishtanemihi Swastino Bruhaspatir Dadatu Yo antah pravishya mama vacha imam prashuptam sanjeevayati akila shaktidhara swadamna anyamshta hastacharana shravanatvagadin pranan namo bhagavate purushaya tubhyam lasatu shrimadanandatirtendurno hurudambare yadvachashchandrika swanta santapam vinikrantati padavakya pramanajnan pranamya shirasa gurun vyakarishe yata bhotam vishnu tattva vinirnayam. So, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 8th session of Chandogya Upanishad. So, I have to admit, we are entering into a very, very interesting aspect of Vedantic philosophy. The interesting aspect here is the diverse views that have evolved across the various traits and strands of Vedanta within the Sanatana Dharma. Comes from this section. At least much of the inspiration is taken from this section of that conversation between Uddalaka and Shvetaketu, leading on to diverse views of the relationship between Brahman and Jiva and the place of Jagat in all of existence. So this triad that we have discussed on several occasions takes a key focus in this section of chapter 6 of Chandogya Upanishad. And that's the reason why I feel that this is probably the next 2 or 3 classes or sessions on Chandogya Upanishad is going to be the crux of the problem of Vedanta, if you like. And to get to that section, we had to spend about 7 sessions talking about the background, the fundamentals of what has been discussed before the thesis is developed in this particular section. So like before we go into the nitty-gritties of it, I think it's very, very important to just revise ourselves and recalibrate ourselves with regards to what is being discussed so far. I think this again is very important because it sets the scene as we make our entry into the famous Shruti called Tattvamasi, and what is the relevance of that with regards to all the previous things that we have discussed, because that is the only way you should study the Upanishads, is to study it in context. Yeah. So what is that context before we enter Tattvamasi Shruti and have a whole-scale discussion of the various strands of thought around this? So initially, we all know Sarvan, Vedan, Aditya, Mahamana, Anuchanamani, Stabda Ayaya. So that was a key situation that actually prompted Uddalaka to actually give his son philosophical inquiry, because this fellow had been to Gurukula for 12 years, like us, and then thought that he knew everything. But actually, his body posture and his body language, the way he approached his dad, clearly was indicating that this fellow was full of ego and arrogance. So how did the Upanishad describe that? It describes very figuratively: Sarvan, Vedan, Aditya, Mahamana, Anuchanamani, Stabdayaya. The Stabdayaya is very, very profound. It says he stood like a pillar, basically indicating there was so much ego and arrogance that he stood like a pillar, did not do namaskara to his dad. So that is the context. So that is where this philosophical discussion started. So we should never lose thought of that background to the Upanishad philosophy. And of course, the dad asked him, Yena ashrutam shrutam bhavati, amatam matam avijnatam vijnatam viti. Do you know about which? If you know, then you know everything about. You hear about which means you've heard about everything. Thinking about which means you've thought about everything. And our our Shvetaketu is dumbstruck at that point of time. And then we discussed over 6 sessions about the various ways in Uddalaka actually brings forth that relationship between Brahman and Jivas, and the Prakriti or Jada Tattva. What is the relationship? So to bring that and to discuss the preeminence of Brahman, he gives three examples which we have done, and Pavanji had summarized that very beautifully a few sessions ago about the three examples. He started off with Yata Somya Ekena Mritpundena Sarvam Mrunmayam Vijnatam Syat Vacharambana Vikaro Namadeyam Mritikati Eva Satyam Yata Somya Ekena Lohamanina Sarvam Lohamayam Vijnatam Syat Vacharambana Vikaro Namadeyam Lohamaniti eva satyam yata somya ekena nakanikrantanena sarvam karshnaya samvijnatam syat vacharambana vikaro namadeyam krishnayasam iti eva satyam. So he gave three examples, and there we also discussed the fact that when three examples are given, clearly the three examples should bring forth three different concepts. Yeah, there is no point in ranting about the same thing. So there is a fallacy in philosophy called punarukti. Punarukti means repetition. So there is a difference, repetition and reiteration. Yeah. So reiteration in Shastra is called avritti, whereas punarukti is a repetition, saying the same thing again and again and again. So which is a fallacy. So if you have three different examples, and if you're going to use the three different examples to say the same thing, it's not particularly a strong philosophical point. What would be even more fruitful for people like us who want to know the philosophy is, you have three examples. What are the three concepts that you can understand from these three examples? Yeah, that becomes very, very important. And then we have spent a lot of time talking about sadrishya and pradanya, and we said the sadrishya means similarity. So the similarity, when you know that something is similar, then you know that everything is similar because there is one thing that you have known. So that could be a big thing or a small thing. If you know a big thing, by similarity, you know all small things. Or if you know a small thing, by similarity, you will know all big things. So there is sadrishya and kaimutya. So that is the first and the third example. So here the sadrishya is this Brahman is Satchidananda, and all other sentient beings also have an element of Sat and Chit and Ananda of various degrees proportionate to their capacities and attributes, and that is where the similarity stops. Yeah. So Jivas, as you know, is atomic, whereas the Supreme Brahman is all pervasive. So they are different, categorically different entities, but there is some similarity with regards to the fact that they are sentient, they have Chit, Chesid, Ananda, they are Sat, all those attributes are there. So that is one aspect. So if you know that this Brahman is Satchitananda, you will also realize all other sentient beings are also Satchitananda. Or if you know a small, a small animal, for example, and you know it is moving and doing about its job, then you know there is some sentiency in that. So then if you understand that sentiency in a small being, then you will know that the big beings also have the same, they have sentiency of various proportions, which is of course infinite in Brahman. Okay, then of course the big concept of pradanya came about, of preeminence or the independence of Brahman. Yes, Swatantro, Bhagavan Vishnu is what the Shastras tell us very, very clearly. So this preeminence or independence of Brahman, so if you know something that is the most important, or you know something that is the independent being of the universe, and all else are dependent on it, then by knowing that one means that knowing all other is as good as knowing all other things. Yeah? So that is the other concept of pradhanyatva. And to bring home that message to Shvetaketu, what Uddalaka does is he opens up a whole scale discussion of establishing the preeminence and independence of Brahman. Yeah, that is what the rest of the chapter that we have discussed so far has been about. So how did he take that? How did he illustrate to Shvetaketu about the preeminence of Brahman? The first thing he took about was before creation, what was there? Sadeva Somya Idamagra Asid Ekameva Advitya. And we have spent a lot of time talking about it. So that was one argument that Uddalaka puts forward to provide evidence that Brahman is the preeminent being of all of existence, because he was the only one who existed before creation. All else was in suspended animation. So that itself gives you the idea of preeminence of Brahman. And in fact, that is the most important example that should bring home the truth. Then what Uddalaka did was he went through the sequence of creation, and he said how the stages Ap and Annam came about. and then how these three tejas, apa, and annam mixed with each other in various proportions and combinations to bring about the whole of Brahmanda into being and the whole of Pindanda into being. So in that we saw so many illustrations that Uddalaka gave. He gave illustrations of Agni, Surya, Chandra, and Vidyut. And there he said, if you see these three colors, red, white, and dark, then you know the three aspects, tejas, ap, and annam, are there in those Brahmanda entities. So that is for our contemplation. Then he said, what about in Pindanda? He said, look, even in Pindanda, that is the Jivas acquire a body, which is their creation. And that acquisition of body happens only in three forms, everywhere in the universe. What are the three forms? Andajam, Jivajam, Udbijam. So through eggs, through like mammals, through womb, or plants through seed. Those are the three ways in which even the Jivas can get created. Creation for the Jivas, as you know, is they come into being, they acquire a body. Yeah, so he talks about the three there. So look at, I put three everywhere, starting from the three examples, and then Tejas Apannam is three. And here we have also had a conversation about the concept of Trimurti that somehow has come into this modern day Sanatana Dharma of Brahma, Vishnu, and Maheshwara. That also gets inspired from these Tejas Apannam concept that comes from the Upanishads. Yeah, so there is that three there, Trimurti. Then the three colors of the whole of Brahmanda, again, is Trimurti. And the three ways in which the Jivas can acquire a body is also three. Then among the Jivas that acquire the body, the most evolved, at least on earth, the most evolved, and that is for our sadhana or the sadhana sharira, is the Purusha or the human beings. Yeah. So then he takes human beings as an example. Look at the human beings itself. That is you and me. That is Uddalaka and Shvetaketu and the rest of us here. Uddalaka says, take our body itself as an example and see what happens in our body when you eat annam, or when you drink water, or you eat certain substances that have tejas quality in them. What happens to them? He takes the example of annam and he says how the annam gets divided into three aspects. The subtle aspect of annam goes to the mind. And we had a session about how in Gita, Krishna talks about the various foods and the Satvika, Rajas, and Tamasika foods and how they influence the mind. Again, if we know this conversation between Uddalaka and Shvetaketu, that chapter discussed in Gita becomes more interesting. When you drink water, what happens? Part of the water becomes urine, part of the water becomes blood, and the other part of the water then becomes pranaha. So that is the three aspects of water. Then you take tejas. Again, in tejas, he said the what you eat in the tejas form, something becomes bone, then it becomes marrow, then it becomes walk. So again, whatever we do in this world, everything gets differentiated into three. And the three somehow should bring home the truth to you that the tejas, ap, and annam, that is, either tejas can be Lakshmi or Chaturmukha, ap is Vayu or Mukhya Prana, annam is Shiva or Rudra. So these three exalted sentient beings should come to our upasana every day in our life, because this is what we do every day. We drink, eat, and we have some fatty meals. That is tejas. Yeah, so this is all we are doing in our daily lives. So in our daily life, we can actually bring this concept into practical worship, not just going to the temple, but actually practical worship of actually taking tejas up and annam in our daily life is what Uddalaka is actually illustrating to Shvetaketu in these examples. So now what we do, we eat and drink and eat fatty meals, for example. Why? To survive, to be alive. Now, when a human being is alive, what does that mean? That human being goes through three states of consciousness in samsara. Yeah, forget about the fourth state, which is mukti, which might happen to some of us, but it is not going to happen to all of us. But for those of us who are in this mundane world, the jivas who eat up annam and who eat annam, who drink up and who also eat tejas, what do? They are alive and they go through three stages of consciousness. That is all they do. What is their three states of consciousness? Jagrati avastha, swapna avastha, and sushupti avastha. So there also it is three. Yeah. So again, Uddalaka there, we have discussed this in the Mandukya Upanishad, where Varuna has clearly taught us that in all these three states of consciousness, the Jiva is entirely dependent. The Jiva actually does not make any does not have independent action at all, is what Mandukya Upanishad, Varuna's teaching primarily is, and linking that with Omkara Tattva. Akara for Jagrati Avastha, Ukara for Swapna Avastha, and Makara for Sushupti Avastha. So that we have discussed in Mandukya Upanishad, and here also Uddalaka is reminding us of these three states of consciousness. So what did we do last week? We took up the three states of consciousness, and one of the most important states of consciousness that reminds us of our dependency with the Supreme Being was the Sushupti Avastha. Yeah. So that Sushupti Avastha is what Uddalaka takes for first discussion. So how did it go? Uddalako Arunihi Shvetaketum Putram Uvacha Swapnantam Me Somya Vijanihi Iti. Okay. Yatra etad Purushaha Swapiti Nama Sata Somya Tada Sampanno Bhavati Swam Apito Bhavati Tasmadenam Swapiti Achakshate Swam Hi Apito Bhavati. Okay. So he was talking about this dreamless sleep state, and we are all experts in this now. So I'm just going to pause for a minute and mute some audio. So there is some background noise that is coming through. Let me just check. Okay, okay, yes, I've done that. Yeah, okay, that's fine. So let's keep going. So in Swapna Avastha, in Sushupti Avastha is what Uddalaka takes. And he takes the Sushupti Avastha again to illustrate the total dependency of Jiva and Brahman. Remember in the three examples, he had talked about Sadrishya and Pradhanya. In that Pradhanya, he said everything else is dependent. Now he has shown dependency in the sense we are dependent on the Supreme even for our existence. Then he has said we are dependent on the Supreme, on these three entities for the maintenance of our bodies. Then he has said we are dependent on the Supreme and these Tejas, Apa, and Annam for everything that we eat, the digestion, everything else that happens in our bodily function, our physiology is again dependent on these three entities and the Supreme Being. And then he talks about Sushupti, again illustrating Sushupti is a classic example of total dependence. Yeah. So what is that sleep state? The Sushupti state, we said the Sushupti state is where the Jiva is not aware of the external world. It is not aware of its internal world. That is the contact between the Jiva and the mind is gone. The contact between the mind and the external world is gone. The Jiva is just himself. Yeah, he is not in touch with any of the external or the inner world. Now, in that state, what is the position of the Jivas? And we all know we are utterly helpless. A burglar can come into our house, a snake can sit on our heads. We would not be aware of it. So that is our state. So what is that state? So he says that state is when he gives an example. Again, Uddalaka gives a beautiful example. What is that example? Sayata Shakuni Shutrena Prabaddo Disham Disham Patitva Anyatra Ayatanam Alabdva Bandhanameva Upashrayate Evameva Kalu Somya Tan Mano Disham Disham Patitva Anyatra Ayatanam Alabdva Pranameva Upashrayate Prana Bandhanam Hi Somya Manaiti. So this particular example is the first example of the 9 illustrations that Uddalaka gives in his famous thesis of Tattvamasi. So this is the first example where he takes the example of a bird, which is the Jiva, tied to a post, which is Brahman. Okay, that Brahman is called Swam. Yeah. Why is he called Swam? Because he is the Swatantram. So it's a shortened form of Swatantram. Swatantram is Swam. So this Jiva, what is it doing during the daytime? It is running around everywhere. But actually, its distance of travel is actually dictated by the length of the thread that it's tied to the pillar. That this length that dictates how much it can fly. So that is that dependence there. Okay, so the thread or the sutra there is the pranaha. Yeah, and by upalakshana, it is not only pranaha who is up, It is also Tejas and Annam. So this Jiva, in its mundane activities of flying around everywhere, it is actually dictated by these three entities of whatever it does. It is that sutram that holds it. And what happens to it? It runs around everywhere. It is tired. And in the night time, it is so tired that it comes and sleeps next to this pillar or the post to which the string is tied. So that is the Brahman and that is the Jiva. And the illustration is extremely clear. There is no confusion here at all. It says Pranameva Upa Ashrayate. Upa, we all know, is sitting close. Ashraya means sitting. Upa means close. Close. Pranam is this pranasya pranaha. Pranam eva means it stresses. It goes and sits next to this prana. That is why it is called swap. Swam hi apito bhavati. Therefore, it is called swam or swap. Swap is the deep sleep state. So here we finished it off there. So we need to now take it forwards where we left. So this is where our friend Uddalaka has been telling his son, look at that state of total dependence where you are different. You are next to this pillar. He has not said pranameva you become. Yeah, he didn't say when the deep sleep you become prana. Definitely not what Uddalaka has said here. All that he has said is pranameva upashrayate. So goes and sits next or rests next to Brahman or pranasya pranaha, also called sat, also called swam. Now, this is an important concept of Sushupti, which you all know from Chandogya Upanishad, because during our samsara, in our three phases of life, every night we go through this phase of Sushupti. Okay, but we are not aware that we are in close proximity of Brahman. Although we are in Sushupti, we are in close proximity, we are not aware of that state. Whereas moksha is that state where you are positively aware of your close association with Brahman. But still you are tied, still you are dependent, still you are distinct, but you are aware that you are always in close association with the Supreme. So that is the beauty of Uddalaka's example here, that when you think about it more, you also realize that is the state of the Jivas actually even in moksha, that they somehow not become Brahman, because that is not what our Uddalaka has said. He has said pranameva upashrayate. Similarly is the state of moksha also, that they are only upa ashrayate. They don't become the same. Okay, so this is an important concept. At least these are all the arguments that come in Vedantic philosophy as to what is it that the Uddalaka is telling us. Is he saying that this bird becomes the pillar, or the bird is next to the pillar? If the bird becomes the pillar and next day morning it wakes up, then the same bird has to come out again. Okay, but that is not what Uddalaka is saying. He's saying the bird is next to the pillar. So I'm just giving these kind of subtle details so that you watch the language of the Upanishads, watch the words, rather than jumping to any conclusions. Yeah, again, I've told this before. We may read the Upanishads with a hypothesis in mind, but that is not what our rishis are telling us. The rishis are telling the opposite. They're telling us, read the Upanishad carefully. Chadayanti iti chandamsi. Break open everything. Understand the Upanishad to understand the truth. Don't have your fabricated truth and then see those evidences in the Upanishads. That is very clear from what Uddalaka is telling us. So let's move on. So what happens next? So then we talk about, Ashana Pipase. So in the waking cycle, so we spoke about the Sushupti. So in the waking up cycle, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., what are we doing 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. before driving and going to work? We are doing Ashana and Pipase. So we eat and we drink. So we took Ashana last week and we said that hunger, that the desire to eat is called Ashishishati Nama. So that desire to eat comes from Rudra because he is the Abhimani of the mind. Okay. And then we discussed how that Rudra is dependent on Aap or water or prana, and how that prana is dependent on Chaturmukha and Lakshmi, and finally how Lakshmi and Chaturmukha are dependent on Sat. So in that sense, all these three entities are ultimately dependent on Sat. So this whole concept of food go back to last week's lecture and look at it again. It's a bit complex, but I hope I've given you sufficient illustration. So what Uddalaka gives an illustration there is, how do you know that when you eat, when you have desire to eat, so shungam, yeah, when you see the shoot, which is called hunger, then you should search for the source. And that is what Uddalaka does. He says, look, think about the food. Where did food come from? If there is no rain or water, there is no food. That is up. Where did the rain come from? If there is no sun, there is no rain. So that is Tejas. Where did Tejas come from? And we have done it in Gita's, Yad Aditya Gatam Tejo, Jagat Bhasayate Akilam, and so on. But here, Uddalaka finishes off with a very, very important statement. Sanmulaha, Somya Imaha, Sarvaha, Prajaha, Sadayatanaha, Sat Pratishtaha. So Sun means Sat. Sat is the Mula. Sat is this Brahman. He is the source and everything is dependent on it. Sat Mulaha. Somya Imaha Sarvaha Prajaha. Praja means Jiva Jatas. So all these Jiva Jatas from Chaturmukha Brahmas, he is the Ashraya, Sada Ayatanaha. Okay, he is the one who controls them as their Antaryami. Sat Pratishtaha. And he is the final destination for everyone. Okay, so these words are very, very clear. Sanmulaha, Somya Imaha Sarvaha Prajaha, Sada Ayatanaha, Sat Pratishtaha. So who is this Sat? Again, we have to go to the very first statement that Uddalaka has made. Sadeva Somya Idamagra Asi Ekameva Advitiyam. That Sat who was there even before creation, that is that Sat that all these things are dependent on. Sanmulaha, Sada Ayatanaha, Sat Pratishtaha. So that is about even the hunger that we get. We eat, but we don't ask the question, what is that hunger? Where did it come from? This is what our rishis want us to do. And that is what philosophy is all about, to ask these questions that we assume, we take it as granted, and we don't even bother thinking about this, about hunger. Why should we drink? Why should we eat? And stuff like that. So Upanishads go and tickle us to have and ask these questions and find subtle philosophy, which is what Uddalaka does. Now look at this example of cooking rice. Yeah. So this is a beautiful example. You have to eat something, you need rice, which is solid, annam. You need to put some water, and then you have to put fire. So you have tejas, up, and annam before you get anything to eat. Yeah. So, and I also gave you an illustration about how fertilization happens. We also spoke about metabolism there. So go back and revise those slides. But I hope with this picture, you get an idea as to how when we eat, we are dependent on the Supreme for everything. Sanmulaha. Okay. So that is Ashana. Ashana means to eat. Pipase. Pipase means to drink. So what about for Pipase? So there it's very similar verse. We can run through this very, very quickly. So atayatra etat purusho pipase iti nama teja eva tat pitam nayate tad yata gonayaha ashwanayaha purushanayaha iti evam tat tejo achashta udanyeti tatra etat shungam utpatitam somya vijanihi na idam moolam bhavishyaditi Tasyakva moolam syad anyatra adabhya adbihi somya shungena tejo moolam anvicha tejo somya shungena sanmoolam anvicha. So this is very similar to the previous verse, but I'll just take you through this verse. The word to watch there first, udanya. Okay, udaka means water. So udanya, previously it was ashanaya, now udanaya. Okay, udanaya, which is, so we get thirst. So the question is, how does thirst happen? And what happens if the thirst is not quenched? Or what happens if we drink a lot of water and if the water is not processed in our body? So you should be asking these three questions. So if the water is not processed by our body in our whatever body metabolism, then what happens? It leads to fluid overload, and you know all the medical consequences of a fluid overload. If you don't eat food, you'll have dehydration and other things. Okay. So what the Uddalaka is telling us is, when you drink a glass of water, it goes into your body, it goes into your stomach, it gets absorbed. After that, what happens? Have you thought about it? So he says, Tejas looks after that. And an example there I put here is, This is like the sun and the ocean. So where there is water in the ocean, and then when the sun is there, the water evaporates and it is processed in the atmosphere and it eventually comes back as the sun. So that process of water is dependent on the sun. Similarly, what the Tejas, the Shri Tattva and the Chaturmukha do in your body is when you drink water, they control what happens to the water and they ensure that the water is metabolized properly. So this is a metaphorical description of how the water, which is Mukhya Prana, is dependent on Tejas, and again that is dependent on Brahman. So even the drinking, the thirst, the quenching of the thirst and the metabolism of water, everything is again dependent on Brahman. So Sanmulaha, Somya Imaha, Sarvaha, Prajaha, Sada Ayatanaha, Sat Pratishtaha. Who is this Sat again? Sadeva Somya Idamagra Asid, Ekameva Adviti. So in this discussion about the Sushupti state, Shakuni Shutrena illustration, and also talking about Ashanaya and Pipase, our Uddalaka has approached our activities of daily living in a different angle. We eat and drink and we sleep. So all these three states, we are not only we are dependent on Tejo Banna. So when I say Tejo Banna, it means Tejas Apan Annam. Okay, it is dependent on Tejo Banna and this Sat, who is called Swam, who is called Brahman, who is called Vishnu, who is called Krishna, whatever. Okay, so he concludes here in this section to say, Yatatu kalu somya imaha tisro devataha purusham prapya trivrit ekaika bhavati taduktam purastadeva bhavati. Okay, so all this I've told you before. How with this trivrit. So if you look now you have to have a comprehensive view of what Uddalaka has said. We have this human body. This body, which is the external material stula sharira that we have, which has got Tejas Apan Annam. And we have understood how these Tejas Apan Annam have helped us make this body, which actually comes from Brahmanda. We are stardust, right? Our body is stardust. Stars are also made of Tejas Apan Annam. And our body is also made of Tejas Apan Annam, which means Chaturmukha Brahma, Shri Tattva, Mukhya Prana, Shiva, Rudra. So they are all preeminent entities that operate and do the work of the universe under the direction of the chief operator, who is called Brahman. Okay, so the question there Uddalaka essentially wants to ask us is, what is our role in all these internal process? What is our role? All that we have done is put food in our mouth, put water in our body, and we just we lied on the bed. That's all we have done. Yeah, actually, in all these internal processes, we actually do not have any control. We think we have control, but actually we do not have control of what is going on. When something goes wrong, you get a disease and you go to the medic. But when something doesn't go wrong and things are automatically happening, why is it is happening? Yes, from physiology we understand there are various molecular pathways of why this happens, this protein is involved and this happens and so on. That is what most of us do. At least that's what I do in my routine work. But the bigger question is, why is it that it should happen that way? So that is called nimitta karana. All that science and medicine does is upadana karana. What that is what it does. It asks how, it only finds out how things work. Yeah, so how does a gastrointestinal system work? All that we can say from our medical experiences, oh, it goes into the stomach, then it goes in the intestine, oh, pancreas makes some enzymes, oh, liver does something, and they said this is the process. But the bigger philosophical question is, why does it happen that way? Why should it be this way but not some other way? Who has made it that this is all designed in this way? So this is what philosophy about. That is a nimitta karana, and that is what Uddalaka is asking us to inquire the nimitta. What is the efficient cause of all this? Yeah, material cause is fine. Your science will give you the material cause, but the efficient cause, what is it that's doing it? Think about Tejas Apannam and the Supreme Brahman. Because our role in all this internal process is minimal. That is the truth. And it is this hard truth that Uddalaka wants us to face up to. Okay, and then he goes on. Okay, so here on the left side, I've just said Yatatu Kalu Somya Imati Sro Devataha Purusham Prapya Trivrit Ekaika Bhavati Taduktam Purastadeva Bhavati. So that is what I have summarized here. So we eat, we drink, then we sleep, we have a body. Or you can look at the reverse. We have a body, and with that body, we do daytime activity, we sleep. When we are awake, we eat. Okay, it is all happening only with this. Now, Uddalaka is giving us another shock treatment to understand how we are actually dependent on these beings. So I'm going to pause there for a minute and I put a question here. What is Shiva and what is Shava? Okay, so who is going to take that question? What is Shiva and what is Shava? Who is going to volunteer here?
Shava means a dead body. Shava.
Yeah.
And Shiva is the Ahankara, which has the life.
Okay, thank you, Pratibhaji. Correct, well done. Perfect answer. So Shiva means auspicious and also a living body. Shava means a dead body. Why is a dead body called Shava? Okay, have we ever thought about that? Dead body is Shava. Why is it Shava? Because it is inauspicious. It is also a creation of God. It is still there. Why do we call it a Shava? Okay, whereas when it is living, we say it's Shiva. Okay. For example, in certain languages, we say in Kannada, for example, if somebody is dead, Shava, the other name is Sattu Hoda. Okay. In Tamil, it is called Settu Poitan. Okay. And in Hindi, it's so who is going to come here and illustrate us what is a dead body in Hindi called? Devalji. Margaya. My mom said Margaya. Yeah. Margaya. So what does Margaya means? Gone. Mar means what? Yeah, so if you think about the etymology of those, it becomes very interesting because this philosophy of Uddalaka fits in perfectly well. Because hold on to that idea. Okay. Now here, yes, here. So the next verse, Uddalaka asks us to think about this next. Yasya somya purushasya preyato vang manasi sampadyate manaha prane prana tejasi tejaha parasyam devatayam. Okay. Preyata is a very significant word that Uddalaka is. Preyata means prayana. Yeah? Prayana means what? Journey. Okay. Jiva does a journey. It does two journeys. When it leaves this body, there is a one-way journey or a two-way journey. Yeah. So again, that prayana word is very significant in Sanskrit. And we know the beauty is splitting it open and reading it that way. So pra can be prakrishta, a pra can be prayasada. Yeah. So prakrishta means very beautiful journey. Prayasada journey means it's full of hard work and full of pain. Yeah, two-way journeys. So what are those two-way journeys? Anybody wants to take a guess as to what are those two journeys that this Purushasya Preyata? So who is going to answer that?
Prayers and prayers.
Very good. Shreyas and prayers is one, but Shreyas and prayers Deval is when they are actually, when the Stula Sharira is there. We are talking about the Shava situation where the Jiva is leaving the body. So what are the
So
two
you
ways?
mean Swarga and Naraka?
Can I have a...
Yeah, possible. Deval will hold there. Sushupti.
either they get moksha or they return back to samsara.
Okay, okay, thank you. So both of you have had interesting insights. So yes, Shushruti is spot on there. So Prakrishta Yana means, as you know, Devayana and Pitruyana. Gita talks about it, right? The path of the sun and the path of the moon. When you go through the path of the sun, you never return. Whereas when you go through the path of the moon, you will return, and all those things, they all get their inspiration from the Upanishads. Chandogya talks about this quite a lot. So one-way journey is towards moksha. That is Prakrishta Yana. Two-way is Prayasadayana, with lots of suffering. That is our samsara state, up and down, up and down. Yeah. So here Uddalaka is asking, when you start the journey, yasya somya purushasya preyato. So when you are about to die, so this is what he is talking about. For us to think about it, we don't. Yeah, but think about it. What happens before a human being dies? The first thing that happens is the person stops talking. Yeah. And then he goes into an unconscious state. Then after that, all that we know is he is breathing. Then we only, even around the time he stops breathing or he has erratic breathing, we know that he's got a temperature. Okay. And when the temperature in the body is gone, then you know this fellow is gone. Okay. So our Uddalaka gives a very interesting analogies here as to how that prayata, how does the jiva leaves the body. So this is very interesting. So first thing it says is Vang manasi sampadyate. Sampadyate means to merge. It merges. So the walk merges in the mind. Okay. So in the physical sense, you could say the person stops talking, but he may still be thinking. It's just that he may not open his eyes or he may not be able to talk about this. There is an example that Uddalaka gives later about how a sick person on his deathbed, how all the relatives are sitting around him and what happens. He also takes that example. It is a similar kind of example here. So he says, Vang manasi sampadyate. The walk, the speech merges with the mind. What is he actually talking about? And again, we've said the language of the Upanishads is the language of Abhimani Devatas. Yeah, Abhimani Vyapadeshestu Tat Visesha Anugatibhyam is the rule of Veda Vyasa. When you read these things, how can walk merge with mind? It doesn't make sense, right? How will speech merge with the mind? In the physical sense, it is a senseless sentence. That is why to understand the sentence, you have to go for Abhimani Devatas. So basically what he says is, Parvati, who is the Abhimani Devata of walk, merges with her husband, who is the Abhimani Devata of Manas, which is Shiva. So Parvati merges with Shiva. And as we discussed before, Annam, when we talk about Tejas Apannam, we always talk about their consorts. They both go together. So that is the view of Uddalaka. So the Parvati merges with mind. And we all know Parvati is Abhimani Devata of speech. So is Saraswati. So is Bharati. There are so many deities who are Abhimani Devatas of speech. Parvati is one. And Manas Abhimani Devata is Shiva. So what the Manas thinks, what the mind thinks, Parvati does. Yeah, that is the Adideva interpretation of that. So then it says, okay, so this fellow who may stop talking, but he may still be thinking in his mind. We do not know as relatives outside, he may still be thinking in the mind. But what will happen in that process of death is eventually the mind will merge with pranaha. Manaha prane sampadyate. Okay. So manaha prane, which means you have to use sampadyate there. Yeah. So manaha prane sampadyate. So the mind then merges with the breath. Again, that doesn't make sense. What does it mean to say mind merges with breath? That means Rudra merges with Mukhya Prana. Okay. Then Prane Tejasi. So what will happen in this? If you think about it, the mind may stop working and this person may be in deep coma, but he may still be breathing. Okay. And we see that in our medical practice that patients are just breathing. Yeah. So what does that mean? Prana is there and the body is breathing. Okay. But prane tejasi. So then what might happen is this prana will then merge with the tejasi. Tejasi is the Shri Tattva and Chaturmukha. So when the prana merges with tejasi, then what happens is the body may stop breathing. The person may stop breathing or he may be cane stoking or he may have very, very erratic breathing. And eventually the breathing may stop. But even when the breathing stops, for some time, that person will still be warm. There is still some heat in the body. Why is that? He says, prane tejasi. Okay. Then see the next verse. Tejaha parasyam devatayam. Then the Tejas merges with Parasyam Devatayam. What is Parasyam Devatayam? Means Para Brahman. Who is that Para Brahman? The Supreme Being, the Sat, the Som, the Swam, the Sat, the Brahman, the Atman, whatever you want to call him. So when the Tejas then merges with Brahman, then what happens is the Brahman decides to vacate. When he decides to move, then what will happen is all these entities that have merged in Brahman, along with the Jiva who is here, they all exit the body. Okay, that is what is called death. Jivas do not die, and our Shastras never talk about the death of the Jivas. Yeah, Jivas are eternal. It only talks about the journey, prayata. Yeah, it only talks about the prayana and what that prayana is. That prayana is when the sat leaves the body, all these fellows have to leave, including the jiva. That is why in Kannada we say sattu hoda. The sat iddanala, the sat who is Brahman, he has left the body. Settu poitan. So this settu, I'm pretty sure comes from the sattu of Sanskrit. He is gone. That is why the body is dead. And if you look at Hindi, mar gaya, mara gaya. So what does that mean? Ma ra. Ma ra is the name of the Supreme. Ra is Ananda, Ramayati. Ma is Jnanam. This Jnanananda Maya has gone. Yeah. So if you take Marana, this Mara was there before. Now that Mara is not there before. That is why it is called Mara Na. Mar Gaya. Settu Poitan, Sattu Hoda. So all these ideas come from this, these kind of Upanishad discussions, basically telling us the Jiva does not die, but it leaves the body. So here is a fundamental truth that Uddalaka is telling us. And then he is asking that question, can you control this? Can you control when you are in your deathbed? Are you able to control when you are going to die? And when your body is going to stop functioning? What is our role in this process? He's asking you that question. Okay. Again, bringing that stark reality of how not only in the Sushupti state, in deep sleep, you are dependent on Brahman, but even in your death, at the point of death, you have no control, mate. Yeah, so you just have to leave because Sat is living. If the Supreme Being, Sanmulaha, Sada Ayatanaha, Sat Pratishtaha, if that Sat decides, I am going to leave this body, there is no other way. Everybody has to leave. Okay. If he decides to come in, everybody else comes in. Okay. Again, talking about the total dependence of the Jivas on the Sat. So by giving these examples, Uddalaka has actually summarized the whole life history of human beings. Yeah, we are born, and she took the Retas example. Then we are alive, we are eating. The body, he took an example. Our eating and drinking, he took an example. Our states of consciousness, he took an example. And even at the point of death, he takes an example to illustrate the pradhanyatva of Brahman. Yeah, he talks about, look at the supreme independent being. He is controlling every aspect of your life. Okay, so this is the underlying current of what Uddalaka is talking about. As soon as he said this, yeah, yasya somya purushasya preyato vangmanasi sampadyate manaha prane pranastejasi tejaha parasyam devatayam saya esha anima etadatmyam idam sarvam tat satyam sa atma tattvamasi Shvetaketu. Okay. As soon as he said this, he puts this amazing verse. Saya esha anima aitadatmyam idam sarvam tat satyam sa atma tattvamasi. So I would encourage all of you to memorize this. This philosophy, by saying this, when you say this verse, you will remember the whole other things that Uddalaka has taught his son, or Shvetaketu. Yeah. So now, what does this verse actually mean? So this is what we are now entering into, that real amazing verse and the philosophical diversions that has happened in Sanatana Dharma. He has previously said how you are totally dependent on this Brahman at the point of death. And he has also given the illustration of that bird tied to the post. And then he has Saya Esha Anima, Aitadatmyam Idam Sarvam, Tat Satyam Sa Atma Tattvamasi. So to read this, we need to understand the context. So what is the context? I've just given you a tour de force of chapter 6.1. Sarvan Vedan Aditya Mahamana Anuchanamani Stabda Eyaya. This fellow is standing like a pillar full of ego. So I put it in a red box. Yeah. Now, in that, what kind of dialogue happened here? Sarvan Vedan Aditya Mahamana Anuchanamani Stabda Eyaya. Shvetaketu Yennu Somya Idam Mahamana Anuchanamani Stabdo. Utatam Adesham Aprakshayaha. Yena Ashrutam Shrutam Bhavati, Amatam Matam, Avijnatam, Vijnatam Bhavati. So this second he said, what is this son? You're showing so much arrogance. Shvetaketu, Yennu Somya Idam Mahamana Anuchanamani Stabdo. So he saw his son being arrogant and egoistic, and he says, what are you so egoistic? Let me teach you the real constitutional position of the Jiva that is inside you. And over the last 7 sections, he has told the Uddalaka, he has told Shvetaketu how in every aspect of your life, you are dependent on the Supreme Being. Okay. We need to remember this. Okay. In that context, do we all think that this Uddalaka has done all the ranting about creatorship, the total dependence, and he has said you are very egoistic and arrogant? Do you think he is going to then say, but you should not be arrogant, Shvetaketu, because you are actually God himself? Okay. Let us look at the logic of this argument. Yeah. If you say that you are very egoistic, but you know what, actually you are God yourself. So in that context, if you're going to teach your son who is very egoistic and you're going to tell him you are God himself, is the ego and arrogance of Shvetaketu going to go up or it's going to come down? So I just want to pause for a minute and see what the views here is going to be. Who is going to come in there? I would love another view on this one. Any takers? Okay, so I will carry on if we are all quite shocked by this statement, because this is the context. And we should not forget when we read the Upanishad, what is the Upakrama? What is the Upasamhara? Upakrama is where, how did it start? And Upakrama, how is it going? And what is the context? Without that, we should never read the Upanishad and take some ideas. This is the humble submission of many acharyas. Yeah, they have taken this rule of Veda Vyasa called Prakaranat. Prakaranat means contextual relevance. Yeah. So in this context, when the son is egoistic, will the father say, Tattvamasi, you are that God, so your ego and arrogance should go? If anything, if my father told me that I am God, but I had so much ego and arrogance, my arrogance only will go exponentially high. Oh, wow, I am God myself, so I will have even more of an ego. So that is problematic of actually saying Tattvamasi actually means that the Jiva is the Brahman or the Shvetaketu is Brahman himself. Yeah? That is one argument. So I'm just putting in some thoughts for you to think about and make up your own minds as to what the truth there about the story. We have spent 3 months, 4 months leading up to this point. Yeah. So how to approach this verse critically, without preconceived notions, but with rules of scriptural interpretations. And that is, again, many acharyas tell us that don't have your preconceived hypothesis or idea and see what the Upanishads is saying. See the Upanishads in its own merits. Yeah. So this is called Samanvaya. Yeah. The study and contemplation of Shastra is serious business because our careers as soul is at stake here. Yeah, let's not forget that. And that is the reason why Veda Vyasa in the 4th sutra said Tattu Samanvayat, and we have done this before. And even in Srimad Bhagavatam, the very first line says that that is very important. Janmadhyasya yato anvayat, which means Samanvayat. I have underlined that for you. Even Bhagavatam instructs you in the very first verse, Anvayat, do a proper critical analysis of the scripture before you understand what the truth there is. So what I'm going to make is today, for the rest of a few minutes that we have, and also the following weeks, is to take you through the journey of how this led to diverse views among various acharyas. We'll bring in some polemics here and talk about the philosophical debates and so on, so that we have an impartial view as to the richness of philosophical debate in Sanatana Dharma. We each may have our own understanding and truth about it that is based on our own intrinsic attributes as souls. But that is not the intention here. The intention here is actually to give you an approach, various approaches, so that you arrive at the truth yourself. So I'll make some attempts. So when we have done this before, and I just want to again give you a summary. I think this we did in one of the Brahma Sutra sections. What is the epistemological algorithm? So when you have something in a scripture, how do you interpret this? Okay. So we have two things, you have to separate them into: material things, non-material things. Material things, if it is talking about masala dosa, you don't need Vedas to talk about masala dosa. You can just use your indriyas and you understand, you get the knowledge of masala dosa. So material things, knowledge about a masala dosa, perception is superior to agama. If, for example, Shvetaketu Upanishad says, this is not masala dosa, this is idli, we can reject that statement, Shvetaketu Upanishad, because with perception, we know that this is masala dosa. Okay, so that is called upajivya, upajivaka, pramana, prabalya. So those are there are technical terms. Let's not go there. So perception is superior to agama for material things, and this is important. The reason why I say that is Vishishtadvaita, Dvaita, Jainism, all the realistic schools of Western philosophies, they all keep perception as the most important means of knowledge for material things of the universe. Okay. The exceptions are Buddhism, Advaita, and there is another school of Western philosophy called Solpism. They do not accept knowledge that comes from perception. Vimatam mithya drishyatvat. That is the axiom, that is the statement, say, for example, from our friends from the monastic school. They will say, Vimatam mithya drishyatvat jadatvat parichinnatvat. That is the equation there, that anything that is perceivable through your indriyas, anything that is jada, anything that is limited, they are all unreal or mithya. Okay? So that is the argument of Advaita, and the perceptual knowledge is problematic for other schools from that perspective. Yeah, good luck to them. By categorizing perception and the knowledge gained through perception as unreal, I'm not sure how our friends in monism are able to use their eyes and read a text like Tattvamasi and say that I am Brahman, because that perceptual knowledge itself is unreal. So that is problematic, but that is their problem and that they need to resolve. But this is the state of affairs. All other schools of the Indian philosophies take perception to be superior to any agama. For non-material things such as Jivan, Brahman, Karma, Punya, Papa, things that we can't touch, see, or hear, and taste and smell, these things, the Agama is superior to perception. So the statements from Apaurishaya Agama, we have spent a lot of time talking about how the authority of the Vedas is superior, is supreme, and Agama is Vedas, primarily Apaurishaya Vedas. So the knowledge from the Apaurishya Vedas that talk about Jiva, Brahma, Karma, Punya, Papa, they become important. So that is the step one of this algorithm. The second step of this algorithm is, then once you see a statement in the Vedas, then you have to ask the question, is this the Niravakasha way? Is it a Niravakasha Shruti, or is this a Savakasha Shruti? Okay, I'll come to it a bit later. Is it Niravakasha or Shavakasha? Okay, anybody want to take this up at this point? We have done this before, just want to rekindle your memory. Can anybody remind us, what does Niravakasha mean? What does Savakasha mean? Okay. So
is it similar to Apaurishaya, and this one very similar to that? Apaurishaya and
yeah, likely Sudarshan, yeah, Pragnesh.
Nirgun and Sagun, or Niskam and Sakam?
Yeah. So it's all the nir and sava is where it's confusing you, I think. So niravakasha and savakasha. Look, we're talking about the messages of the Vedas, okay, of a statement, a line in the Upanishads, for example. So niravakasha, savakasha. Niravakasha means it is a statement in the Shruti for which you cannot make another meaning. Okay, you cannot have another meaning for that particular statement. There is no possibility of having another interpretation or another approach to it. So that is called Niravakasha Shruti. Savakasha Shruti means it is a Shruti that you can interpret it in various ways. Yeah, and it depends upon your own intelligence, of course, but that is what Savakasha Shruti is. Yeah, and that is the beauty of Vedas, because Vedas are very cryptic. They are very cryptic, and you have to break open. I've said this here. Chadayanti hava yenam chandamsya. Put this from Mahaitareya Upanishad that defines what Vedas are. Chadayanti. You have to break it open, squeeze it, work hard at it, and then arrive at a truth. Because when you do that, you will have various interpretations. Then you have to use your Tatparya lingas, as they are called, and Purva Mimamsa Shastras for interpretation before you arrive at a truth. Okay, so I give you an example. So this famous verse in Mundaka Upanishad, Dvasuparna Sayuja Sakaya Samana Vriksham Parishashvajate Tayor Anyaha Pipalam Swadati Anashnan Anyaha Abhichakashiti. This is our famous birds, where it talks about two birds, Jivan and Brahman bird. That is a Niravakasha Shruti, because there is no way in which you can interpret it differently. That is a Niravakasha Shruti. But take the Chandogya Upanishad. Saya esha anima aitadatmam idam sarvam tat satyam sa atma tattvamasi Shvetaketu has got 12 different meanings that are available. Yeah, so at least 12 different meanings. And so that becomes a Savakasha Shruti. So the rules of interpretation there is a Niravakasha Shruti is superior to Savakasha Shruti. Agama is superior to perception for non-material things. Yeah, so these are all the rules of interpretation, and we need to have, we don't need to have full-scale knowledge of the nuances and niceties of these interpretations, but at least some general bird's eye view of how do we approach a Savakasha Shruti. This is a Savakasha Shruti. Nobody can have any arguments on that. Yeah. So with that in mind, let me just bring you back. So what did Uddalaka start off with? He started off with the first example. I told you there are 9 examples here. He started off with the first example. Sa yata sakuni sutrena prabaddo disham disham patitva anyatra ayatanam alabdva bandhanameva upashrayate evameva kalu somyatan mano disham disham patitva anyatra ayatanam alabdva pranameva upashrayate pranabandhanam hi Somya Mana Iti, and then all the discussion of everything that we have done now. Saya Esha Anima Aitadatmyam Vidang Sarvam Tat Satyam Sa Atma Tattvamasi. So you take this verse. It is talking about the Jiva and Brahman and their relationship. So this is talking about a non-material entities. So we can all accept that Agama is the source of knowledge for us. Next, we ask the question, is this a Niravakasha or a Savakasha Shruti? It is a Savakasha Shruti, which means there are various ways, at least 12 different ways of understanding this verse. So it is not a Niravakasha Shruti, it is a Savakasha Shruti. So that is the step 2 in the algorithm. Then what you do? Prakaranat. You see the context in which this verse actually comes from. What is the context? Saha, Yaha, Yeshaha, Anima, Yetad, Atmyam, Idam, Sarvam, Tat, Satyam, Saha, Atma, and then Tattvamasi. So there are 12 words before this. Before this Tattvamasi comes. So this Tattvamasi has got a history, and it's got a background, it's got a grammar, it's got a syntax, it's got a whole lot of words behind it, and it is placed in that context. It comes in that context of interpreting this verse. What we should not be doing is just pluck this, Forget about the whole context of everything that Uddalaka has said, starting from creation and the states of the bodies and the states of our life, and then just take Tattvamasi. Oh, I am Brahman. Thou art that. Okay. Everybody flaunts this, which is most unfortunate, because you can't just pluck it out, forget about rest of the things, because it may not help you in your thesis. Just because it does not help your thesis doesn't mean you should remove other things from the equation. An impartial scientist, a medic who reviews a phase 3 randomized trial, will review the evidence critically, looking at all the variables in the equation, not just take one point. That we all do in our professional and daily lives, whatever our daily life that we do. That rationality is there in what we do in our professions and in our personal work. The same level of rationality we should bring when we interpret scriptural evidences, rather than just plucking it out, forget about the context, and then talk about a philosophy. So this is problematic for many schools of Vedanta. Except the monastic schools, other schools have problems with such an interpretation. So what we will do is, again, over the next 2 to 3 weeks, we'll explore all this about what are those challenges, what are the polemics, and I find it extremely intellectually satisfying and interesting, and I'll share my enthusiasm with you over the next 2 to 3 classes. Okay, so moving on, let us see over the next 10 minutes possibly, what do these 12 words? There are 12 words, right, before Tattvamasi. So what do they actually mean? What is Uddalaka is actually saying? Okay, so we said this bird is Jiva, this post is Brahman. Okay, I've got this person here, this Pindanda, this person who is the blue circle there is the Jiva, and inside the Jiva is the Antaryaman. Okay, just for us to remember this. So Saha, what does Saha mean? And as I said, it is Chadayanti iti Chandamsi. You need to open it up and understand what Saha actually means. Saha means not just that person there. That is just colloquial Sanskrit. That is not what Uddalaka is talking about. Uddalaka Sanskrit is Vedic Sanskrit. Yeah, it's a language of the Vedas. It's Apaurusheya. It's unwritten. It's supremely authoritative. Will he just say that person? No. Saha there etymologically means Saratvat Saha. Okay, that which is the essence of everything. That which is the essence of everything in the universe is Saha. How is that possible? Saratvat Saha. Sara is rasa, the essence. Yeah. So go to Taittiriya Upanishad. There is a famous verse that some of you may know this. Raso vai saha. Rasam hi eva ayam labda anandi bhavati. Kohyevanyat kahapranyat yadesha akasho anando nasyat. Amazing second Brahmandavalli verse there. Raso vai saha. So the Saha means rasa. Raso vai. Vai means authentic. He is the essence. That is why he is called Saha. So again, what I'm trying to say here is, when you read the Upanishads, not in isolation, you should read it in the grand context of the Vedas. What does other Upanishads say about Saha means what? And you bring all that evidence and then understand what Saha means. So Saha means Saratvat, Anandi, Ananda. So Saha essentially means Ananda Swarupa. Okay. Who is Ananda Swarupa? This chap here, Brahman. Yeah. Yaha, look at the next letter, Yaha. Who is Yaha? Yaha, etymology of Yaha again is two. Yamayati. Yamayati means he who is a controller. Niyamana. Okay, Niyamana, Yaha. They are all derivatives from that Yamayati or Yam Yati. So let's look at Yamayati. Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. Antaryami Brahmanam. Yeah. Yah sarveshu bhuteshu tishten sarvebhyo bhutebhyo antaro yam sarvani bhutani naviduhu yasya sarvani bhutani shariram yah sarvani bhutani antaro yamayati yeshata atma antaryami amrutaha. Okay, these are famous verses, Antaryami Brahmanam of Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, which gives you 20 such statements about how this fellow who is Yamayati, who is as an Antaryaman, he is in every aspect of the universe and he controls it. That fellow is Yaha. yamayati iti yaha. Yam yati. Yam means knowledge. Yeah, yati. He gives knowledge, but he is also jnana swarupa. So we all know that the primary swarupa of Supreme is jnana anandamaya. That is Brahman. So he says, everything in your life, you are dependent on that Brahman. Who is that Brahman? He is Saha. He is Yaha. Okay. And then he says, Yeshaha. This is interesting. So Saha means when you talk, some of you do Sanskrit classes. So Saha means somebody who's far away. Okay. Yeshaha means somebody who is close to you. Okay. So Saha can also mean that. Saha can also mean Saratva. So if you take Saha, somebody out there, and then take Eshaha, somebody close to you, that makes more relevance. So Eshaha comes from A, Ishaha. Ishaha means Ishtaha, the one who is about which you are most fond of. So again, this Mundaka Upanishad says, Dvasuparna, Sayuja, Sakaya. Sakaya means what? They are most affectionate friends. So Eshaha in that sense, Ishtaha. Okay. So he says, that fellow who is everywhere in Brahmanda, he is Eshaha. He is actually inside you as your Antaryamin. He is Eshaha. Saha there, Eshaha here, close to you. So we all know the Narayana Sukta of Yajurveda. Antar Bahishta Tat Sarvam Vyapya Narayana Hastitaha. Yeah. This chap who's there is also here. Antar is inside, Bahishta is outside. Tat Sarvam, Tataha, pervaded, Sarvam, everywhere. Vyapyam, who is that? Narayana's, that is Narayana's greatness. Yeah, Stitihi, Narayana Stitihi. So that Antaha is called Aham, that outside Bahishta is called Ahaha, that and all we have done it before. So similarly, Saha means that fellow who is outside. Yeshaha means he is inside. So he is inside you, Shvetaketu, your Antaryamin. He is inside you, but he is still very, very subtle, anima. Okay, and then that's the word he uses, anima, saya esha anima. So that supreme being who is your Antaryamin, he is very, very subtle. Also, although he is inside you, you're not able to see him. That is why he's called anima. Anima means what? Anutvena meya. He's very, very subtle. So Kato Upanishad, as you know, talks about Anor Aniyan, Mahato Mahiyan. Anor Aniyan. Yeah, so he is inside the subatomic. He is inside you. You yourself are subatomic. Inside you, he is there. He is so subtle. Yeah. And also, anima, you can also split it into ma and anayati. Ma means jnanam. So anayati means he who gives you the knowledge to know that he is anima. Yeah. So although he is our antaryamin, we still don't see him, right? We still don't know him. Most of us run our life without even realizing that he's inside us. Okay, that is why we are in this suffering situation. So even for us to know that he's inside us, he has to give us his knowledge. He has to provide the knowledge. That means we need his grace. So that is what is anima there means. Saya esha anima. Etad atmyam idam sarvam. Okay, so that is important. So here is an etad. Now say eshaha means close to you. Etad means very close to you. Okay, etad means your antaryamin. Yeah. So your antaryamin is what? Atmyam idam sarvam. Atmyam. Atma has got so many meanings. One meaning of Atma is your governor, your master, your Swami. Literally, Atma means your Swami. Talks about pradhanyatva. Okay. So he reminds, Etad, this person who is very close to you, idam sarvam, he is atmyam. Idam sarvam there means this kshara, the whole kshara, akshara existence. So we know from chapter 15, you have aksharaha, then you have kutastha aksharaha, then you have ksharas. Ksharas are all the beings from Chaturmukha Brahma to us. Kutastha is Lakshmi. Akshara is the supreme Brahman. That is the overwhelming message of chapter 15, right? 16 to 20 verse. So that all this idam sarvam, that is Kutastha, Akshara and Akshara, he is the Antaryamin and controls. So, Etad Atmyam idam sarvam. Then he describes All the things I've told you so far in this chapter, he's basically summarizing all this. So saya esha anima etadatmam idam sarvam. These are all summary of all the examples that he has given. Then he says tat satyam. Yeah. So tat satyam is the next point that he gives. What does tat satyam mean? Tat means tataha. Tataha means that which has pervaded everywhere. And we also know that tat is the name of Krishna himself. And he said that Om Tat Sat Iti Nirdeshaha. The tat is the name of Krishna himself. Tat also means tataha, that which has pervaded everywhere. We have done Gayatri, where tat means tat savitur varenyam bargo devasya dhimahi diyo yonaha prachodayat. Ta and tat. So tat is also talking about the Gayatri. So this tat is this supreme being. Satyam. Look at the definition of Brahman. Om Brahma vidapnoti param tadesha abhyukta satyam jnanam anantam Brahma. Defines this supreme being as satyam jnanam anantam Brahma. And that exactly is what Uddalaka says here. Tat satyam. Recently, we in one forum we were talking about it. What does satyam means? Sat, ti, and yam. Sat means nirdushta, no doshas. Ti means jnana. Ya means ananda. He is pure jnananandamaya. And there are also other meanings of satyam. Yeah. So he's saying saya esha anima aitadatnyam idam sarvam tat satyam. So in the previous part of the slide, I've said all these beings along with Brahmanda is dependent on this supreme Akshara. He, as you know, Sadeva Somya Idam Agra Asid, Tad Aikshata, Bahusyam, and then the whole universe he brings. Therefore, Tataha Satyam. This created world of the supreme being is real. It is not some illusion that we are told. This is absolutely fundamentally real. The reality of the universe is the same reality of the Jivas and Brahman. Why? Look at Shvetaketu Upanishad. Kavir Manishihi Paribuhu Swayambhuhu Yata Tatyato Artan Vedadat Shashvatibhyaha Samabhyaha. Yata Tatyato Artan is what the Shvetaketu Upanishad says. This Kavihi, this most knowledgeable, Manishihi, Paribuhu, Swayambhuhu, he creates Yata Tatyato Artan, he creates the real universe. Shvetaketu Upanishad. I sometimes wonder where some of our friends of other Vedantic schools have forgotten about Shvetaketu Upanishad, this verse from Shvetaketu Upanishad. I also wonder about how they can forget the very first verse of Srimad Bhagavatam. Janmadhyasya yato anvayad itaratashtarteshva vignaha swarat tena brahma hrudayadi kavaye muhyanti yatsurayaha tejo vari mrudam yata vinimayo yatra trisargo mrusha damna svena sada nirasta kuhakam satyam param dhimahi. Nirasta kuhakam. What does the nirasta kuhakam means? This creation is not a magic. It is not some illusion done by the Supreme. Nirasta kuhakam is the wording from Srimad Bhagavatam. Again, I wonder why our friends have forgotten all these great verses from scriptures and are saying this world is an illusion and mithya. Good luck to them. But from where I see it, the language of this particular Upanishad, Tat Satyam, the language of Shvetaketu Upanishad, Srimad Bhagavatam, and all the things that Uddalaka has said. You know, over 3 months we have read about Uddalaka, about he is giving the whole sequence of creation. He's talking about what happens at every step and so on. If this is a damn illusion, why bother talking about this in this Upanishad or anywhere in the Vedas? Yeah, you don't say this is a great art, but the art is false. Yeah, it just is not adequate scholarship. Yeah, so it's everywhere. In the language of the Uddalaka, he's saying this is Tat Satyam, Tataha Satyam. Why? Atmyam, Idam, Etad Atmyam, Idam Sarvam. Therefore, it is Satyam. Saha, Sadayati there. That Saha there means Sadayati. Again, I want to impress, there are these words that are placed. They do not have the same meaning every time you talk about it. They have different meanings. Yeah? Sadayati means he who gives you all that you ask for. Okay. Saha, then comes our word, Atma Tattvamasi. Okay, so I hope you understand. I was a little bit more articulate because I'm very, very passionate about how this 12 words are placed before Tattvamasi and how we have forgotten the spirit, the essence of what Uddalaka is saying, but just pluck this Tattvamasi and flaunt a philosophy. That is most unfortunate Vedanta from my perspective. And if you look at the spirit of what Uddalaka is saying, he is worshipping the Supreme. He's saying, you're so big, we are nothing, we are so dependent. The problem there is, after saying all this, he has said Atma Tattvamasi. So how do you handle this? Okay, this is what our rishis do all the time. And if you look at these various Upanishads, the rishis would put some cryptic sentences so that, what is Upanishad, for example? Yeah, so I'm going to break there for a minute. So who is going to tell me about what Upanishad means? We have done it before. Tell me, can you give us some answer on what Upanishad means, please? What is the literal meaning of Upanishads? So there are so many meanings. One meaning is Upahvara. Upahvara means secret knowledge. Yeah, it is not available on the street for any Tom, Dick, and Harry. You don't talk about Upanishads in a party of alcoholics. This is serious business. Yeah, and it is secret business, secret knowledge. And that is how our rishis put these words, and they put cryptic sentences and want us to go and do the hard work, want us to do the hard work and understand what is actually there. So let's see how this goes for the next 5 minutes. So let's say Atma Tattvamasi. Look at that word, Atma, Saha Atma Tattvamasi. If you just pluck it out, then it means that Atma is you. Okay. If you forget the other 12 words, which you should not if you are a proper student of Vedanta. Number 2. So look at Atma and Tattvamasi. So some of you who are doing Sanskrit lessons, you have Sandhi, right? Suvarna Dirgha Sandhi, Visasarga Sandhi, Vyanjana Sandhi, and so on. So let's take Swarna Sandhi. So when you have a long vowel and a short vowel. So one word ends with a long vowel and the second word starts with a short vowel. When you do a Sandhi, that becomes a Swarna Sandhi. Swarna Dirgha Sandhi, as it's called. So take grammar, simple grammar. You don't have to go far from here. Simple grammar. If you, for example, say Atma plus Atatvamasi, if you take Swarna Dirgha Sandhi, it is Atma Tattvamasi. Okay. Or you can just keep it as it is, Atma Tattvamasi. So there are 2 ways of actually looking at this sentence, if you like, or the set of words. So that is the first point. Nobody is telling us, we should not be bowed down to the view that we should interpret only as Atma Tattvamasi. We can also interpret as Atma Atatvamasi. Okay, so that is again Savakasha Shruti. So this is what Savakasha means, of ability to interpret the sentence. We can interpret in various ways. Okay, so let us move on. So he said Saha Atma Tattvamasi, and I've spread it out to Atatvamasi Tattvamasi. Okay. Here there is another Atma. Previously it was Aitadatmyam Idam Sarvam. Here he says Saha Atma. So there that Atma has got so many meanings. I don't think we have time today. Maybe we'll take it up next week. Apnoti iti Atma, Adatte iti Atma, Atti iti Atma, Atatatvad iti Atma. Yeah. So Atma, the inner controller, my Swami. So there are so many meanings of Atma there. You need to put that. This Saha, we read as Sadayati iti Sahaha. This Atma there could be any of this. Atatatvat iti Atma is one meaning there. Okay. If you take, so it's again talking about the attributes of the Supreme. And then if you take this angle here, Atma, Saha Atma Atatvamasi. I just want to deal with this first. Many of you may not be familiar with this because you would have just heard people flaunting Tattvamasi as the ultimate philosophy. Here is another view. Atma Atatvamasi. Why? Our Shvetaketu has Stabdayeyaya Sarvan Aditya Mahamana Anuchanamani Stabdayeyaya. So our father Uddalaka has given him instructions And he concludes, this is concluding portions of chapter 6, and he says, shed your ego, Shvetaketu, because you are not him. All the things I've told you so far, did you create the universe? Did you create this body? Do you process the food? Do you process the water? When you go to sleep, do you decide what sleep you get? Do you know how dependent on your deep sleep? Do you know that you cannot even decide when you want to die? And actually, when you die, the Sat has to leave, you have to leave. There are so many dependents in your life. Your whole life is full of dependence. How on earth can you get ego and arrogance? Shed your ego, Shvetaketu, because you are not him. You did not create any of this. When none of these you created, how can you have the ego? So that is a very simple way of understanding the context in which Uddalaka is giving Sa Atma Atatvamasi. Or, again, the beauty of Uddalaka is, you can also read it as Atma Tattvamasi. Okay. Yeah, so what does that mean? That Atma Tattvamasi is a metaphor. The previous one is vritti. So when you have a word, the word gives a meaning. The meaning can be two ways. It can either be mukhya vritti or lakshana vritti. So we have done this all before. Maybe next class we'll handle this again about how does metaphors come into being. So this Atma Tattvamasi is a metaphor, like Simmo Devadattaha. Devadattaha is a lion. Okay, if somebody says Shushrut is a lion, that doesn't mean Shushut has got a tail and he's going to hunt in Nottingham. No, it means he's a very strong person of great leadership qualities. That is what it means. It talks about metaphors. Similarly, Atma, Tattvamasi is a metaphor, not just for other schools, but also for monastic schools. It is a metaphor. Yeah. So we will deal with that, how the Advaita looks at the metaphor, how other schools look at the metaphors in Sanskrit language in the next class, because people forget this. Not many people are even aware that it is a metaphor even in the monastic school, but they just pluck and say this, Tattvamasi, Tattvamasi, much to the disappointment of serious schools of Vedanta. They have to understand that this is a metaphor, and metaphor has got rules. How do you do metaphors? How do you do interpretations? Yeah, there is the Jaha Lakshana, Ajaha Lakshana, Jahat Ajaha Lakshana, the various Lakshanas in Sanskrit language, like other languages, including English. Yeah, how do you use, what are the rules of Lakshanas? Yeah, so all those things we need to put in before we understand. So that is metaphors. The other ways of metaphors, of what is called Abheda Shrutis, the Shrutis that seem to indicate Aikya, like Tattvamasi, they seem to indicate maybe there is, nobody denies that they don't indicate, they don't suggest this. Suggestion is different, but the Tatparya is different. Yeah. When the suggestions are there are other ways of looking at it as well. For example, there is a work of Acharya called Anuvyakyana, where he will say, Swatantrecha Vishishtatve Sthana Matya Aikyayoropi Sadrishyecha Aikyavak Samyak Savakasha Yateshtataha. So he'll give rules. So for example, he'll give examples. We are all one in this matter, means we all have the same opinion. We are stuck as one in the sinking ship, means we are in the same place. We are all one as Indians during Independence Day, means that we have not become one, but we are all synchronized in our thought process. We all look at a picture and we say it is a lion, as I said about our Shushrut, but it is only a resemblance, or it gives you an attribute. Yeah. Yeah. So that is one Lakshana. But when we see a lion picture in a frame, we don't say that is a lion. It is just something that resembles a lion that is there in the forest. So those are all the metaphors that we use in language. So we need to take those and understand the spirit of what Tattvamasi is. So again, I want you to introduce this concept that Tattvamasi is a metaphor. It is not a truth. Just because there is a line called Tattvamasi doesn't it becomes a truth. It needs metaphors and how to interpret this. For example, Jiva is Agnyata, cha Alpashaktitvam, Dukkitvam, Swalpakartata. There is no denial of that. Brahman is what? Sarvajnata adi gunaha. Sarvajna, Sarvashakta, no dukkha, yeah, Sarvakarta. So that is all Brahman. So if you want to bring that equation, that Brahman, that Tvam, Jiva are the same, then you need to handle these issues. Vedas talk about Brahman as Sarvagnya and the Jiva is Alpagnya. How are you going to remove all these qualities and merge them together and then say they are the same? So that is what is the polemics in Vedanta, which is important because I think it's probably there is no access to this literature, but also we do not make an attempt to actually go and explore this literature because we've just assumed just because somebody says Tattvamasi that it is the final truth. It absolutely is not. Look at the grammars of Tat, Saptasu Pratama. For those of you who are doing Sanskrit lessons, Tat can have 7 different ways of looking at it. Yeah. Saptasu Pratama, we will deal with that. Okay, look at 9 different examples. Okay, now throughout his teaching, Uddalaka has only given examples to illustrate distinct concepts. He is not ranting about the same thing. Yeah, there's 9 different examples illustrate 12 different concepts of relationship between Jiva and Brahma. If it is the same thing, Tattvamasi, Tattvamasi, you are that, it becomes repetition, not reiteration of a concept. So Punarukti is repetition, Avruti is reiteration. Punarukti is a dosha, it is a flaw. Yeah, the Tat, as I said, has got so many meanings. Tat Adina, Tat Sadrishya, Tasmin, Tasmat, Tasmai, Tasya, Tat Prati. So you need to take all these things and understand what the Tattvamasi actually means in that line where it's got 12 other words that celebrates the greatness of Supreme. And that is the reason why in chapter 2, Gita, Krishna actually says beautiful 41 and 42 verses. So I want to finish off today to invite one of us in the audience, in our group, to actually to recite these 2 verses, which are very important, because that is very, very important for us to apply in our practical sessions on the Upanishads, because that is what Krishna is instructing. So who would want to take this up?
Madhu?
41 and 42.
Hello, Madhu?
Nita?
Yeah.
Go for it. Nita, go for it.
व्यवसायात्मिका बुद्धिः एकेह कुरु नन्दन बहुशाखाह्यनन्ताक्ष बुद्धयो व्यवसायिनां यामिमां पुष्पितां वाचं प्रवदन्त्यविपश्चितः वेदवादरताः पार्थ नान्यदस्तीति वादिनः.
Thank you, Neetaji. It's very beautifully recited. So, Vyavasayatmika Buddhihi. Yeah, Vyavasayatmika Buddhihi means exercise your intelligence. Buddhi, Vyavasaya, like how a farmer toils his land, similarly toil your intellect. Toil your mind and brain. Work hard on what the scriptures actually tell us to find the truth. Yeah, dive deep into that ocean to get those jewels, not just skimming the surface, is the resounding message of the Gita. And what I think we should do as sincere and serious students of Vedanta is to take Krishna's advice and do that Vyavasaya of these verses, these complicated verses of Upanishads. And hopefully over the next 2 or 3 sessions, we look at this each example. There are 8 further examples to follow, and each one is so beautiful, and we will have a lot of discussions on that as we go along. So on that note, I'm going to conclude today's session. Next week, we have Pavanji from Charlotte, who is going to summarize part A of Journey of Souls. So if you remember, this was about 1.5 years ago. We did a 6 or 7 or 8 sessions on Journey of Souls. And these are basic concepts of Vedanta and stuff. So Pavan is going to do part A of that. So I hope to see us all there next Sunday. So on that note, I will conclude today's session, and Krishna Pranamastu. Happy to take any questions.
Can I have a go?
Yeah, they will go for it.
So Niravakash
Savakasha
Agama, yeah. Are the